A careless mother abandoned her baby by the river. The ancestors responded. A Moontale. Listen closely, children, for this is a tale the elders have whispered for generations. It happened when the moon still trusted humans with its secrets. The night was fierce, angry with thunder that shook the earth and lightning that split the sky. Rain fell like stones upon the village, and the wind howled through the trees like wounded spirits. Through this storm ran a woman, her feet splashing through mud and water. In her arms, she carried something small, something precious. A newborn baby, barely hours old, wrapped in torn cloth. The infant cried weakly, its voice lost in the thunder. The woman's face was hard, set like stone. She did not look down at the child. She did not whisper comfort or love. Above her, the moon struggled to break through the dark clouds. When it finally appeared, its pale light fell upon the woman's face. For just one moment, she looked up. The moon gazed back at her, cold and knowing. The woman turned away quickly, as if ashamed to meet that ancient eye. She ran faster, heading toward the river, where the reeds grew tall and wild, where no one would see what she was about to do. The river was swollen from rain, rushing and angry. Its waters churned with mud and broken branches. The woman reached the riverbank, her breath coming in gasps. She looked around quickly, searching the darkness to make sure she was alone. The baby continued to cry, but softer now, as if it already knew it had been forgotten. The woman knelt on the wet ground. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the child down among the cold reeds. The rain had stopped suddenly, as if the sky itself held its breath. The baby lay there, small and helpless, its cries growing weaker. Without a word, without a prayer, the woman stood. She did not look back. She gathered her wet skirts and ran into the darkness, disappearing like smoke. The moment she vanished, something changed. The clouds parted completely, and the moon emerged in full glory. Its light was brilliant, silver and pure. The moon's reflection stretched across the river like a shimmering path, like a bridge between earth and sky. The baby cried beneath that glow, alone but somehow not abandoned. The water, which had been rushing moments before, grew strangely still and quiet. Deep beneath the riverbed, in places older than memory, the ancestors stirred from their eternal rest. Night faded slowly, as all nights must. The moon, having watched throughout the dark hours, began its descent toward the horizon. Its light grew softer, gentler, like a grandmother's last kiss before sleep. As the moon disappeared, the eastern sky blushed pink and gold. Morning mist rose from the river, thick and white, covering the water like a blanket. A fisherman made his way along the river's edge, as he did every dawn. His name was Adisa, and he was known for his kind heart and steady hands. He hummed an old song his mother had taught him, a melody about the river and its mysteries. His nets hung over his shoulder, and his bare feet knew every stone and root along the path. Then he heard it. A sound that did not belong to morning. A cry, thin and weak, like a bird fallen from its nest. Adisa stopped, his heart suddenly beating fast. He listened carefully, turning his head. The cry came again, from somewhere near the water. He dropped his nets and ran toward the sound, his breath catching in his throat. There, where moonlight had rested hours before, lay a living child. A baby, alone among the reeds, its small fists waving in the air. Adisa fell to his knees beside the child, his hands shaking. "Blessed ancestors," he whispered. He looked around expecting to see a mother nearby, perhaps injured or ill. But there was no one. The riverbank was empty except for this tiny life. He lifted the baby carefully, expecting to find it cold from the night, perhaps sick or hurt. But the child was warm. Its skin was dry and soft, as if it had been sleeping in a comfortable bed instead of lying on the wet ground. Adisa examined the baby closely, his fisherman's eyes searching for any sign of harm. There were no wounds, no marks, no scratches. The child looked peaceful, even healthy, despite spending the entire night exposed to storm and darkness. This was impossible. Adisa knew the dangers of night. He knew about the insects that bite, the cold that steals warmth from small bodies, the wild animals that roam when darkness falls. Yet this child bore no signs of any of these threats. It was as if something had protected the baby, standing guard through the long dark hours. Adisa looked at the river. Its surface shimmered in the morning light, and for a moment, he could have sworn he saw the faint outline of the moon still reflected there, though the moon itself had set long ago. News traveled quickly through the village. By midday, everyone knew about the baby found by the river. People gathered in small groups, whispering, wondering. Some said it was a miracle. Others said it was a mystery that needed solving. But all agreed that something sacred had happened during the nights. That evening, as the sun set and the first stars appeared, the village elders gathered in the sacred circle. They were 7 old ones, men and women who carried the wisdom of generations in their bones. They sat on ancient stones worn smooth by countless gatherings before this one. And they waited for the moon. The moon rose full and magnificent, larger than usual, its face clear and bright. One of the elders, the oldest among them, stood slowly. His name was Okoi, and his hair was white as river foam. He lifted his carved staff toward the sky, toward that watching moon. "The moon does not lie," Okoi said, his voice still strong despite his age. "It sees all things, remembers all deeds. This child was found where moonlight fell strongest. The baby suffered no harm, though the night was cruel. This was no accident." The other elders nodded slowly. They understood. This child had been spared by forces older than the village itself, forces that lived in the moon and the river and the earth beneath their feet. Adisa the fisherman took the child into his home. He had no children of his own, and his wife had passed away 2 seasons before. His house was small and simple, made of mud and thatch, but it was clean and warm. He made a bed for the baby from soft cloth, and placed it near the doorway where the breeze could keep the room cool. That first night, something beautiful happened. As darkness fell and the moon rose, its light found its way through Adisa's doorway. The silver beam moved across the floor like a living thing until it rested on the child's face. The baby, who had been fussy and restless, immediately grew calm. Its small eyes closed, and it breathed deeply, peacefully. Adisa watched this happen night after night. No matter where he placed the baby's bed, no matter if clouds covered the sky, somehow moonlight always found the child. It was as if the moon itself had claimed this little one as its own, as if the sky was watching over what the earth had abandoned. The fisherman would sit by his fire in the evenings, watching that beam of light rest on the sleeping child, and he would whisper prayers of thanks to the ancestors. He knew he was not raising this child alone. Something greater, something ancient and powerful, had chosen to help him. The child grew, and as the months and years passed, the village began to notice strange blessings. During full moons, the river would become unusually calm and generous. Fish would surface in numbers never seen before, swimming toward the fishermen's nets as if offering themselves willingly. Adisa's catches were always abundant during these times, enough to feed many families. The farmers noticed something too. After nights when the moon was full and bright, their crops would grow taller and stronger. Plants that had been struggling would suddenly flourish. Seeds that seemed dead would sprout overnight. The elders would gather the children and lead them in moonlit prayers, and the next day, the fields would be greener than before. People began to whisper. "The moon knows this one," they would say, watching the child play by the river. "The ancestors have marked this child for something special." They treated the child with respect and wonder, not fear, but reverence. They understood that they were witnessing something sacred, something that connected their village to the old ways, to the ancient powers that their grandparents had honored. The child was gentle and kind, growing stronger each day under Adisa's care, and the moon's mysterious blessing. The village had never been more prosperous, more peaceful. It seemed that goodness had taken root among them. But darkness, once released into the world, always finds its way back. One evening, as the sun began to set and the thin crescent moon appeared like a silver blade in the sky, a woman arrived at the village. She looked tired from traveling. her clothes dusty from the road. She asked for water, for a place to rest. The villagers, being kind people, welcomed her and offered her food and shelter. The woman rested that night, but sleep would not come to her. She lay awake in the house where she was staying, listening to the sounds of the village settling into darkness. Then she heard a child's laughter, clear and happy, coming from near the river. Something about that sound struck her like a blade to the heart. She rose and walked to her window, looking out into the gathering darkness. By the river, in the last light of day, she saw a child playing in the water under Adisa's watchful eye. The moonlight, though the moon was barely visible, seemed to gather around the child like a protective cloak. The woman's hands gripped the windowsill. Her breath caught in her throat. Recognition struck her with terrible force. Those eyes, that face. She knew this child. She had carried this child. She had abandoned this child on a stormy night. The woman could not sleep. That night, and many nights after, she lay awake in torment. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard the cry of a baby in the storm, weak and pleading. She saw herself placing the child among the reeds. She felt again the rain on her face as she ran away. But now, instead of relief, she felt only crushing guilt. The child had survived. More than survived, the child had thrived, had been blessed, had brought prosperity to an entire village. Everything she had thrown away, the ancestors had reclaimed and honored. The shame was unbearable. Night after night, the moon rose and fell. And with each rising, the woman's guilt grew heavier. She watched from windows and shadows as the child played, as Adisa cared for the little one with love and patience. She saw the villagers smile at the child, saw how the moon seemed to follow the child's steps. But guilt, when it grows too heavy, does not always lead to repentance. Sometimes, in weak hearts, guilt transforms into something darker. The woman's shame began to twist and change. She started to feel anger at the child for surviving, anger at the village for loving what she had discarded, anger at the moon for exposing her crime with its constant blessing. Her heart hardened like clay in the sun. Then the river began to change. It started slowly, so slowly that at first no one noticed. The water level dropped slightly each day. The fish that had been so plentiful became scarce. Fishermen would cast their nets and pull up nothing but weeds and stones. The river, which had been generous and calm, became stingy and strange. The crops began to fail next. Plants withered in the fields despite careful tending. The rains came, but the water seemed to bring no life to the soil. Farmers worked harder, prayed longer, but nothing helped. The abundance that had blessed the village was disappearing like water into sand. Under a shrinking moon, thin and pale in the sky, the elders gathered again in their sacred circle. They studied the signs, consulted the old ways, and spoke with the ancestors through prayer and ritual. After many hours of silence and contemplation, Okoi stood once more, his face grave and troubled. "The ancestors are waiting," he said quietly. "They are waiting for truth to be spoken. Some wrong has been done, some lie has been told. Until the truth comes to light, the blessings will fade. The river knows, the moon knows, and they are holding back their gifts until justice is served." The villagers looked at each other with worry and confusion. What truth? What lie? Who among them had done wrong? The woman, hearing the elders' words, felt panic grip her heart. She knew what truth they were waiting for, but she could not speak it. To confess would be to face judgment, perhaps punishment, certainly shame. She could not bear it. So instead, her dark heart chose a darker path. She began to spread lies. In the market, she would whisper to merchants and farmers. "I have heard," she would say, "that someone in the village has offended the ancestors, someone has broken sacred law." She would mention names, cast suspicion on innocent people, plant seeds of doubt and division. One evening, under a pale moon that seemed to watch with cold disapproval, the woman stood in the village square. A crowd had gathered to discuss the failing crops and empty nets. She raised her voice loudly, pointing at various villagers, accusing them of breaking taboos, of disrespecting the ancestors, of bringing this curse upon them all. The moonlight fell across her face as she spoke. She looked righteous, sounded convinced, seemed certain of her accusations. But those who looked closely might have seen something else in her eyes: the desperate fear of a cornered animal, the wild panic of someone trying to hide their own guilt by blaming others. The moon climbed higher in the sky, silent and watching. Its light was cold that night, colder than usual. The elders knew lies when they heard them. They had lived too long, seen too much, to be easily deceived. They watched the woman's accusations with quiet, knowing eyes. They saw how she shifted blame, how she avoided certain topics, how she never looked directly at the child who played innocently nearby. Okoi called for the sacred stone to be brought forth. This stone was ancient, passed down through countless generations. It was said to have been blessed by the first ancestors, carved from the riverbed when the world was young. The stone had a special power: it could reveal truth and expose lies. On the night of the full moon, when the moon's power was strongest, the elders placed the sacred stone in the center of the village. Everyone gathered around it in a great circle. The moonlight fell upon the stone, making it glow with an inner light. Each person accused must touch this stone, Okoi declared. The moon will witness the truth. The ancestors will judge. Those who are innocent have nothing to fear. But those who have lied, who have done wrong, will be revealed. The villagers murmured nervously. The woman, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt her hands grow cold. She looked up at the moon, that huge bright moon that seemed to stare directly at her. She wanted to run, to disappear into the darkness. But she was trapped by her own lies. One by one the accused villagers came forward. An old farmer who had been accused of breaking harvest laws touched the stone. Nothing happened. The stone remained cool and quiet. He stepped back, relieved, and the crowd murmured approvingly. A young mother who had been accused of disrespecting the river spirits touched the stone next. Again, nothing. She smiled nervously and returned to her children. A merchant, a hunter, a potter all touched the stone, and all were proven innocent. The moon climbed higher with each test, growing brighter, as if pleased to see truth emerge. The watching light seemed to purify the air, to wash away the fog of suspicion and fear. With each innocent person revealed, the village relaxed a little more. Soon only one accused person remained untested. The woman who had started all the accusations stood at the back of the crowd, trying to hide behind taller people. But hiding from the moon is impossible. Its light found her anyway, illuminating her pale face, her trembling hands. The crowd began to notice her reluctance. Eyes turned toward her. Voices asked, "Why does she not come forward? Why does she hesitate?" Okoi's voice rang out clear and strong. Let the accuser herself touch the stone. Let her prove her own words are true. The crowd parted, creating a path between the woman and the glowing stone. She had no choice. Slowly, with dragging feet, she approached. The woman reached out toward the sacred stone, her hand shaking like a leaf in the wind. Her fingers were inches from its surface. She hesitated, trying to pull back, but the eyes of the entire village were upon her. She had trapped herself with her own lies. Finally, her palm pressed against the stone. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The woman screamed. The stone beneath her hand blazed with light so bright that people had to shield their eyes. The moon above flashed through the clouds, its light intensifying until it seemed like day. The river, which had been low and quiet, suddenly roared to life. Water surged and crashed against the banks with tremendous force. The woman fell to her knees, her hand still touching the stone, unable to let go. Words poured from her mouth, words she had kept locked inside for months. "I did it," she cried. "I abandoned my baby by this river. I left my child to die in the storm. I am the liar. I am the one who brought this curse." Truth broke free like water through a broken dam. It poured out of her in great painful waves. She confessed everything: how she had been ashamed of the baby, how she had run away in the storm, how she had returned and recognized the child. The village stood in shocked silence. The moment her confession ended, a sound filled the air. It was the cry of a baby, distant but clear, echoing across the water. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the river, from the sky, from the very ground beneath their feet. The sound rose and rose, carried by the moonlight, until it reached the stars themselves. People covered their ears, not because it was loud, but because it was unbearable. The cry held all the pain of abandonment, all the cold of that stormy night, all the loneliness of a newborn left to die. It was accusation made sound, truth made music. The cry seemed to shake the foundations of the world. The village trembled. Children pressed against their parents. Elders gripped their staffs. The woman on the ground wept, her body shaking with great, terrible sobs. The sound of the baby's cry mixed with her weeping, creating a chorus of guilt and judgment. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the crying stopped. Silence fell, deep and heavy. The moon shone down, bright and merciless. The river continued to rush and roar. Everyone looked toward the water, toward the sound of rushing currents. Something was about to happen. The ancestors had heard the truth. Now they would respond. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The child stepped forward from where Adisa had been holding them protectively. The little one walked with steady steps toward the river's edge. Though young, the child moved with strange purpose, as if guided by something beyond understanding. The moonlight followed every step, creating a silver path beneath small feet. The moment the child reached the water, something miraculous happened. The river, which had been violent and angry, began to calm. The roaring decreased to a gentle rush. The churning water smoothed into soft ripples. It was as if the river itself recognized the child, remembered the baby it had refused to harm on that stormy night. The child stood at the very edge, looking out across the water. The moon's reflection was perfect and clear on the surface, a silver circle of lights. The child's own reflection appeared next to it, and for a moment, they seemed to merge, child and moon, earth and sky, human and ancestor. The elders, witnessing this, slowly bowed their heads. They understood now. This was no ordinary child. This was someone the ancestors had chosen, someone the moon had claimed, someone the river had protected. The old powers had marked this child for a special purpose from the very first moment of abandonment. The village watched in awe and wonder. Even the woman, still kneeling by the stone, looked up with tears streaming down her face. The river began to swell again, but differently this time. The water rose with purpose, with direction. It flowed toward the woman who still knelt by the sacred stone, her hands pressed against its glowing surface. The moonlight reflected in the approaching water, making it shine like liquid silver, bright and sharp as a blade. People stepped back, giving the river room to move. This was not their judgment to make. This was between the woman, the ancestors, and the powers she had offended. The water crept closer and closer, surrounding the woman in a growing circle. She did not try to run. Perhaps she knew that running was impossible. Perhaps she had finally understood that truth must be faced. The child remained at the river's edge, watching calmly. The moonlight continued to rest on the child's face and on the woman's face, connecting them across the distance. Mother and child, separated by abandonment, but now brought together by the ancestors' justice. The water rose higher, lapping at the woman's knees, her waist. She closed her eyes, waiting for the river to take her, to drag her down into its depths as punishment for her crime. The village held its collective breath. Would the river claim her life? Would the ancestors demand her death for what she had done? The judgment of the ancient powers was about to be revealed. But then the child spoke. The voice was small but clear, cutting through the tension like a silver thread through dark cloth. The river immediately halted its advance. The water froze in place, still touching the woman but not rising further. The moon seemed to shine even brighter, as if leaning forward to hear better. The child walked toward the woman slowly. Each step was deliberate, careful. The villagers parted to let the child pass. When the child reached the woman, they stood there, face to face. The moonlight fell on both of them equally now, bathing them in the same silver glow. The child looked at the woman who had given birth, and then abandoned them. There was no hatred in those eyes, no desire for revenge. Instead, there was something deeper, something older than the child's young years should have allowed. Understanding, perhaps, or wisdom given by the moon itself. The woman stared at the child, this baby she had left to die who had instead become blessed. Tears ran down her face like rain. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though the words seemed too small, too weak for the magnitude of her crime. The child reached out and touched the woman's face gently, wiping away one tear. "Let her live," the child said, speaking now to the river, to the moon, to the ancestors themselves. The words hung in the air like a prayer. The moon, which had been bright and sharp, began to shine differently. Its light became softer, warmer, like the gentle touch of a grandmother's hand. The harshness that had filled the night began to fade, replaced by something closer to peace. The river responded immediately. The water that had surrounded the woman began to recede, flowing back to its bed. But as it withdrew, it left something behind, a sense of cleansing, of purification. The woman gasped as if taking her first real breath in months. The weight of guilt that had crushed her seemed to lift slightly, just enough to let her breathe. The child spoke again, louder now, so everyone could hear. "She gave me life, even if she gave up on that life. She carried me before she abandoned me. For that gift of existence, I give her the gift of mercy. Let her live, but let her learn. Let her atone, but let her heal." The elders looked at each other in wonder. Such wisdom from one so young could only come from the ancestors themselves, speaking through the child as their voice. This was justice tempered with mercy, punishment mixed with opportunity for redemption. This was the old way, the true way. The woman collapsed fully to the ground, weeping harder now, but differently. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of the first small stirrings of genuine repentance. A warm wind passed through the village, though moments before the air had been still. It rustled through the trees, stirred the water, lifted people's hair and clothing gently. The wind felt alive, purposeful, carrying with it the scent of flowers and rain and earth. It was the breath of the ancestors, their approval made manifest. The moon, high above, seemed to soften even more. Its light became gentle, almost tender, washing over the village like a blessing. The harsh judgment was over. Balance had been restored. A crime had been committed, truth had been spoken, mercy had been given, and now the natural order was returning. The sacred stone stopped glowing and returned to its normal appearance, just an ancient rock worn smooth by time and touch. The river settled into its bed, flowing peacefully as it had before the troubles began. Already, fish could be seen jumping in the moonlight, their silver bodies flashing as they rose and fell. The woman remained on the ground, her shoulders shaking with sobs. But these were cleansing tears now, washing away the poison of guilt and lies. The child stood beside her, one small hand resting on her shoulder. Not condemning. Not forgiving yet, perhaps, but showing the possibility of both healing and redemption. The elders stepped forward, forming a circle around woman and child. "The ancestors have accepted this choice," Okwe declared. The punishment was decided. The woman would serve the river, would care for it daily, would tend to its banks and protect its waters. Every dawn she would come to the river and work. She would clear debris, strengthen the banks, plant reeds, help the fishermen. She would spend her days giving back to the place where she had committed her crime. And every night, the moon would watch her work. Season after season, moon after moon, the woman fulfilled her obligation. At first, her movements were heavy with shame. She could barely look at the river, barely stand to be near the place of her terrible choice. But slowly, gradually, something began to change. The physical work started to heal something inside her. Each stone she moved, each reed she planted, each kindness she showed to the fishermen, these acts built a bridge back to her humanity. The river, which she had once feared, became familiar. The water that had threatened her now taught her patience. The moon that had exposed her now watched with something softer than judgment. People would see her there every evening, working until the light failed, then rising with the dawn to work again. They saw her dedication, her persistence, her genuine effort to make amends. Slowly, very slowly, their hard looks began to soften. Forgiveness, they learned, is not given in a moment but earned over years. Years passed like water under a bridge. The woman's hair began to show threads of gray. Her hands, soft when she had first arrived, became strong and calloused from work. Her face, which had been tight with pride and fear, relaxed and opened. The constant work by the river, under the moon's watchful presence, wore away the hardness that had made her abandon her child. She began to smile sometimes when helping the fishermen untangle their nets. She would hum songs while planting reeds, the same songs other mothers sang to their children. When the village children played by the water, she would watch them with eyes that had learned gentleness, would warn them away from dangerous currents, with a voice that had learned care. The moon saw all these changes. Night after night, year after year, it rose and watched her work. And in its ancient light, transformation occurred. The woman who had run away from responsibility was becoming someone who could be trusted. The mother who had abandoned life was learning to nurture it. The child, growing into a youth now, would sometimes come to the river and work beside her. They did not speak much at first. What words could bridge such a gap? But slowly, carefully, like plants growing toward light, they learned a careful companionship. Not mother and child perhaps, but not enemies either. The child grew into a guardian, just as the ancestors had intended. Under every full moon, the youth would walk the length of the river, checking its health, ensuring its purity, protecting its gifts. The special connection forged on that stormy night of abandonment never faded. The river responded to the guardian's presence, remaining calm and generous under their care. The village prospered again. The crops grew tall, the fish returned in abundance, children were born healthy and strong. People said it was because the balance had been restored, because truth had been honored and mercy had been given in equal measure. The guardian never forgot what the moon and river had done. Every full moon, there would be a ceremony. The whole village would gather by the water, and the guardian would lead them in prayers of thanks to the ancestors, to the moon, to the river itself. Children grew up hearing the story, understanding that they lived in a blessed place because of events that had happened before they were born. The woman, old now and tired from years of work, would attend these ceremonies. She would stand at the back, quiet and humble. Sometimes the guardian would look her way, and their eyes would meet. In those glances was a complicated history, but also something harder to name. Not forgiveness perhaps, but understanding. Not love, but acceptance. The village changed because of what had happened. A new law was spoken by the elders and accepted by all. No child would ever be abandoned again. Any mother or father who found themselves unable to care for a baby would bring that child to the village, and the community would raise them together. This was the moon's law now, the ancestors' command. The moon itself became more than just a light in the sky. It became a reminder, a witness, a judge. Parents would point to the full moon and tell their children, "The moon sees all, the moon remembers all. Live in truth, for you cannot hide from that watchful eye." The sacred stone was moved to a place of honor in the village center. Once a year, during the full moon of the harvest season, everyone in the village would touch it, renewing their commitment to truth and honesty. This became known as the moon ceremony, and people came from other villages to witness it and learn from it. The guardian ensured these traditions were kept, that the lessons learned were never forgotten. The river flowed clean and strong. The crops flourished. The village became known throughout the land as a place of justice and mercy, where truth was honored and redemption was possible. And every night the moon rose and set, watching, remembering, blessing. The years became decades, and decades became generations. The original people of this story grew old and passed into the care of the ancestors they had honored. New children were born, played by the same river, looked up at the same moon. But the story did not die with those who had lived it. Elders told it to their grandchildren on moonlit nights. Listen, they would say, to the tale of the abandoned baby and the mother who ran away, of the moon that witnessed and the ancestors who responded. The children would sit with wide eyes, learning the lessons written in water and moonlight. The river still flows, children. If you visit it, you can see fish jumping in the moonlight, just as they did that first night. The water is clear and cold, blessed by events that happened long ago. Stand on its banks, and you might feel something watching you, something ancient and powerful but not unkind. The moon still rises, night after night, watching over the village and all who live there. Its light falls on good people and bad people alike, but it remembers everything. When you look up at that silver circle in the sky, remember that you are seen, that your actions matter, that truth will always emerge like moonlight through clouds. And this story is still told beneath the moon's light. Because the moon sees all, and the ancestors remember. Because mercy is possible, but only when truth is spoken. Because what we abandon may be saved by powers greater than ourselves, and what we destroy may be rebuilt by love and time and patient work under a watching sky. Remember this tale, and live by its lessons.